The last thing we're going to talk about is how do you write up your research or transpose your research so that it is a transcript that you can actually turn into a journal. We've already talked about how you have to make sure that it is written in a way that is important to the audience, that the audience can understand. Now, again, sometimes this is very, very difficult because you sort of have to take this big project and this big group of research and you have to sort of narrow it down and you have to make it very, very, very concise. And this is sometimes being concise and having word limits and having limitations is very, very difficult for people because you thought this big stuff and now you have to be very narrow and constrictive, and you're going to have to do lots and lots of versions of it because all the pieces have to fit together. And you would be surprised. Some research at certain journals doesn't look like the original hardly at all. So it's almost like it's had a lot of plastic surgery. It doesn't even look like a thing like when it's pictures from high school, right? A lot of our research is like that. It's you really have to sort of go with what they're emphasizing and what they care about. Again, because they're looking out for their own audience. They're also looking out for, they know that people look to them for specific information about a topic or about an approach or about a patient population. Whether that be a public health journal or a medical intervention journal or a journal about different ways about pain relief. They have very specific focus and they have very specific requirements, and you have to write to that. So you could have an article that you're going to send to one journal and you only send it to one journal at a time. You don't send it to 3 or 4 all at once because they get really upset about that. And they will find out because sometimes you're reviewing for 2 or 3 different journals like I am, and you see the same thing coming back. And you might have to say, I've already reviewed this and rejected it or accepted it at this other journal. So it does call into question. So it does take a long time. But you do have to very much make sure that you are writing specifically for what the journal wants. You have to make sure that the audience you're writing for understands what you've done. And part of why you have to be so concise and when you have to follow this very strict format, and I know a lot of you were not so happy sometimes with this strict format, is because part of this is so that if I read your research, I can use it to either duplicate it or to change your research a little bit and see if I get the same outcomes. Because remember from the very beginning of time when we talked about how you are building upon the shoulders of other people who have already done this. And that's how research and medical knowledge and patient care moves forward, is we look at where we've been, look at the new research, and then we try to adapt that and improve the system constantly. And that is the purpose of research. That's the purpose of publications, so that we can do this constantly. But it has to be understandable. It has to be in a format, and a very specific format. It has to be so that I can understand to the level where I can duplicate it. So some things that you may not think you have to give references for, or some things you don't think are important, might be very, very important. So those are things to keep in mind. But it's a nice problem to have because it means you are now distributing your research, and now you are entering into a field of other scholars, presumably that they care about the issues you care about. They're focused on what you're focused on. So it's a good thing to do. It's a great problem to have. It means you're sort of at the end of it. It also could spur you to think about other research you might want to do based on some of the articles that you might read before you look at which journal you want to put in your subscription to. So those are things to keep in mind. And I know it's been a big change from wider to smaller, but now you sort of understand why that push has happened. And again, it's so that we can be building upon your shoulders and your research, and we can duplicate it. We can see how it's different and not different from other people's. So, got to be concise. Got to be specific. You got to follow the formats that they want, and some of them want very specific formats, so you have to very much read that and do that. Again, there's a rubric that looks at if I can read this and understand it, so that's also a guidepost. I will give you lots of feedback. Your advisors give you lots of feedback, so jump in.